Thanks everybody for joining us. We have with us Tim Mack, who, we actually worked together at the Daily Beast for a while,
Many years ago.
a good number of years ago. Uh, Tim, if you're not following Tim, you absolutely should. And Tim, you got to tell us the best places to be following you. Um, I know a lot of journalists. He was a great journalist. I don't know any journalist that's followed the path that Tim has done, um, which has led to Ukraine. And before we talk about what's going on in Ukraine now, can we just talk a little bit about this because I found it endlessly fascinating. So, how do you go from being a journalist working at the Daily Beast elsewhere to becoming a U.S. Army medic? Is that correct?
That's right. I kind of realized. So I joined the Army in 2017 after working at Politica and the Daily Beast, and I realized that like during a zombie apocalypse, no one needs a journalist. Like no one's like, we need a journalist immediately. Find me a journalist. And I gotta admit, I mean, you and I worked together at the Daily Beast during some pretty cynical years, 2015, 2016, throughout that first Trump campaign. And I remember doing a lot of great journalism during that period, and really digging into Trump's business background and really doing all we could to
Right.
to shed some light on the character and history and personality of this person. And it made no difference whatsoever ultimately. And I was just a little jaded. I wanted to find some way to serve that didn't involve journalism, some other way to use my hands, and so I joined the Army.
And when you entered the Army, I'm just curious, but was it on a path to become a medic, or once you were in, was that a path that you selected versus?
So at the time, yeah, I mean, at the time, I joined, and I believe still is the case. You can choose your job.
You can't
when you sign up, and basically they figure out when the training slots are and how many positions are open. So there are really sought after jobs like dog handler or I don't know, Army diver that are really highly sought after but hard to get those slots. But medics, one of the most common jobs in the military.
Interesting. So how long was your commitment when you signed up?
I signed up for 3 years on the reserve side, and ultimately served 5 years. One thing about that part of my journey is that I didn't just join to become a medic. My whole goal, I ended up joining the West Virginia Army National Guard, and the reason I joined up in West Virginia, not DC or Maryland, Virginia, is because the 19th Special Forces Group is out there. And I joined specifically with the effort to try to become one of the Army's most elite medics. That might not ultimately becoming one. I ended up working in support for special operations, but my not becoming one was one of the great failures of my life, but also one of those things where I learned a great deal about myself. And it's funny how you set yourself on this course. You think, this is what I want. And when it doesn't work or you're unable to achieve that goal, you still come away with something that you can take away from that process. And I think that's what happened with me.
Wow. So, how did you get to Ukraine? When did you arrive?
So what did I learn from the Army? I learned I'm a better journalist than a medic. So back to journalism fast as I can. Like I'm an okay medic. I mean, like if there's an emergency, it's better that I'm around than I'm not. But like it's weird, like journalism implanted in me all sorts of instincts and habits that made me a bad medic. Being a journalist, you have to be paranoid and cautious. You always need to think, how do I know what it is that I know? What conclusions can I draw that are true and technical and absolutely based on all the evidentiary information that I have before me? medicine, and particularly emergency medicine, is very much not like that. It gives no room whatsoever for hesitation and uncertainty. So you go by an algorithm, you go step by step by step. And I realized I struggled terribly. I was great on the book stuff, but on the hands-on stuff, there are a lot of farm boys from Montana or Vermont, as it were, who could do emergency medicine better than me. So what did I do? I went back to journalism after I did 5 years on the reserve side, and was a correspondent for NPR. And weirdly, this is where this military path ended up popping up again, which is that NPR ended up sending me to Kyiv because they were looking for someone with a military background or a medical background that could join a team in case a war would start. You might remember that in 2022, the Biden administration was just going crazy, saying Russia's going to invade, Russia's going to invade.
Yeah.
And so as part of those preparations, I got sent to Kyiv, as a correspondent for NPR.
So
and I landed the night the invasion happened. I landed just a few hours before the full-scale invasion happened. So I get there and at like 8 p.m. and the invasion starts that night in the early morning hours. And
so this is all your fault. The cause and effect of you running. So it was like, that's it.
You could call it good timing or bad timing.
Now that Tim's there, we've got to do this thing.
It changed the course of my life. I mean, it changed. I was supposed to be there for 2 weeks, and it now I've been here nearly going on 4 years. So I spent a year covering Ukraine for NPR, and then decided to start my own company called The Counteroffensive, which covers human interest stories of the war. And you can find it at counteroffensive.news. And it's currently the #1 Substack in the international category. We do deeply reported human interest stories that focus on people and the who, and use the who to describe the what and the where and the when of news. So we go deep into humans' lives and then use that to show what's happening in the world, whether in Ukraine or we're having stories about. You may have heard of these protests that are happening in Nepal, protests that are happening in Serbia, things that are happening. I mean, the world looks, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this too, Stu. The world looks like we are on the verge of some conflagration, some terrible, terrible violence, but to accelerate and cause harm to a lot more of us.
And so you're based in Kyiv.
That's right.
Yeah.
Over the last 2.5 years, we've built this publication. We've got a bunch of young, hungry Ukrainian reporters working for me now, and I'm teaching them and editing and trying to mentor and bring them up to feature writing on a world-class scale. We also launched recently, or about a year ago, a trade publication called counteroffensive.pro. And that covers Ukrainian defense technology. So it's like a very niche trade and technical publication that covers the regulations and the technology that are coming off the battlefield. And so that's something we're doing as well.
Well, so let's cut to what happened in the last 24 hours. I know there is a literal fog of war, but can you kind of give us your take on what has transpired with Russian drones going into Poland? How do you see this?
Well, it's important to kind of take a step back and understand this is not an isolated incident. That there have been a number of Russian incursions into Polish airspace in the last year, and that this is either the 6th or the 7th, depending on how firm you want to believe it was Russian involvement in one of the cases. The 6th or the 7th case of a Russian drone or aircraft entering Polish territory. The big story here is that overnight here in Eastern Europe, the Polish military shot down a number of drones that entered its airspace. Not all the drones that entered its airspace, but some of them. And so it really feels like door has been opened which can't be closed again. That now a member of the NATO alliance has taken action to shoot down Russian military assets. I think there are a number of questions here, which is to ask, how is NATO going to react? And is this situation going to escalate? But also the question might be raised, well, if Poland has already begun shooting down Russian drones, why doesn't it commit to shooting down more Russian drones, particularly Russian drones that approach the Polish border and threaten the people of Western Ukraine? And that's a reasonable question to ask. And the Polish government has tried to stay out of direct involvement in the war so far. It's been a major contributor indirectly through military and humanitarian aid, and actually is one of the countries that has hosted among the most Ukrainian refugees. But you wonder if this isn't something where we've entered a zone we can't go back from.
And to kind of break this down, the NATO response, I was reading of all these different NATO countries that were involved, but apparently there were no U.S. assets. Is that correct?
As far as I know, there were no U.S. assets involved in the shooting down of these drones.
And in the support of it, like I was reading that there was refueling from Belgium or something. As far as we know, there were no active U.S. assets that were being employed.
It's funny when I kind of look at the number of assets that are used by the Polish to shoot down a relatively small number of drones. I mean, we're talking approximately 10. Just a few nights ago, Russia sent 800 drones and missiles into Ukraine, and Ukraine is just popping them off without any of the benefit of refueling and fighter jets and multi-role attack aircraft and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it does seem like it took a really very concerted multi-country effort in order to shoot down a small number of drones. But as far as I know, the United States didn't have any direct assets involved, although they do have a major presence in Poland.
Is there anything that we should read into that, do you think? That it was a willful...
It didn't immediately strike me as a red flag. I mean, because it really does matter which assets were in the area. We don't know the exact attack vectors. We don't know if there were It's not as if we know the United States were on position in the air and declined to shoot. We have no evidence of that right now. So I wouldn't put a big red flag on that yet. Mm-hmm. I do think we should pay very close attention to how the United States reacts now that Poland has triggered what's called Article 4 proceedings. And Article 4 proceedings...
You hear a lot about Article 5, you hear less about Article 4.
Well, Article 4 is a precursor to Article 5, right? So the NATO alliance includes a number of rules, and Article 4 is one of them. Article 4 allows for any members of the NATO alliance to call for essentially a meeting to discuss a threat to the alliance's territory. And it is a precursor for Article 5, which is the self-defense, mutual and collective defense part of the NATO alliance. So in order to activate Article 5, you need at least as a minimum to get people together under Article 4. And so Article 4 basically triggers a series of consultations at meetings among the NATO alliance. But as of yet, there's no expectation that Poland will see this particular incident as an attack that would trigger Article 5.
Now, Tim, just as a kind of side note here, it is accurate, is it not, that the only time Article 5 has been employed or evoked, is that the right terminology?
Invoked, yeah.
Was after 9/11?
That's correct. The only time NATO... Right. And I think this is one of the things that I think hasn't been well explained to Americans is the sense of absolute betrayal and disgust that's coming from Europe. I can say it, you can hear it. These are words, but they don't really adequately describe the sense of betrayal. and the alienation that Europe feels now that it realizes it cannot rely on the United States. And I'm saying this because of what you just referenced, which is that NATO countries have sent soldiers and military service members to fight and die on behalf of the NATO mission in Afghanistan, supported the United States when it asked for help. And now that there's a war in Europe, the United States is led by a president who doesn't seem inclined to help very much at all.
Well, it's a separate conversation, but I know a lot more about the Republican Party than I do about the U.S. military. And these are words that I really can't believe come out of my mouth, but they're actually true. The Republican Party has now become really a functional asset of the Russian Federation. It's become compromised. And it's a process that began slowly at first, like a lot of this, but it's in all aspects of it. I mean, you can go back to some sort of vaguely well-known and well-reported examples like the Russian money that went into the NRA. But I just...
A story I broke, by the way, Stuart.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Good on you, man. Big fucking story. I mean, it really... The NRA has never been the same since then.
No, and I wrote a whole book on the inner workings of the NRA called Misfire.
We have to do a whole thing on that. I'd love to go through that.
We don't have to get into that
today. I haven't read it, and I will correct that error. But when you have... I mean, we don't talk enough about how we have a president of the United States who was elected with help of the Russians. And what did the Russians get? Well, it turns out they got more than they ever could have imagined. And what just, fascinates me about this and troubles me no end, you take someone like Roger Wicker, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, immensely powerful position. I've known Roger forever. He's a Mississippian, I'm a Mississippian. Our dads were friends. I helped elect him. I think it's safe to say Roger's life's ambition was to be chairman of the Armed Services Committee since the time that we were both pages in Washington. And now he is. And he was just reelected, so he has nothing to worry about as far as, this oft-used trope that they're only betraying America because of a primary. And he's not going to face any election, until end of the decade. He ushered in Pete Hegseth. And I just never would have imagined it. I mean, literally, Pete Hegseth is someone that Roger Wicker would not... I don't think he'd let him cut his lawn. I mean, you want this weird, drunken guy with tattoos, like cutting your... I mean, what if he comes to the house? Like, no, we'll get somebody else. And yet that's what's happened. And I don't think that Roger would say that his beliefs on Russia have changed, but I don't think his beliefs on Russia matter. It's what's happening. And you have J.D. Vance, who clearly is sort of basically a mouthpiece for Putin. And it's just extraordinary. And it's not going to change. I think it gives Democrats a huge opportunity to regain this definition of the party of strength in foreign affairs, which they had for a long time. It was really the Vietnam War that unwound that. But so, where do you think this is going to lead? There was been talk since before the invasion of a no-fly zone. Do you think that what we saw in the last 24 hours, as you were kind of saying, is this sort of a gateway drug to a no-fly zone that could be put in effect by NATO?
I don't think. Well, here's the thing: the primary purpose of NATO right now is to keep the NATO alliance alive, right? So its members, its general secretary, its constituent components, the countries. They don't want to. I mean, in the same way that Roger Wicker has changed. I think the shape and nature of foreign relations is warping around this black hole, and the gravitational force that is Donald Trump. And what that means is, what they're trying to do is they're trying to ensure the collective security of Europe in the near term without the United States abandoning them to fend for themselves. How to do that? Obviously, what you want to do is you want to take very small and precise steps. The events over the last 24 hours, huge cause of alarm, particularly in Poland, where the Russians are clearly just trying to test the limits of the NATO alliance. I mean, there's the drone itself, but there's also the question, well, what are you going to do about it? And that's what Putin is waiting to get an answer from. If Poland decides to react in an extremely aggressive way, you could imagine.
What would that kind of parameters of that aggressive response? What would characterize that?
I mean, within the realm of the possible, it would be to start shooting down Russian drones from Polish territory. So, what any Russian drones that enter the zone in which Polish air defense could shoot things down,
like an exclusion zone near the border.
Yeah. Poland could commit to doing that. Poland could do nothing at all, or to say anything that enters our airspace, we're going to shoot down 100%. I don't think this is in the realm of the possible, but it could even start to involve directly Polish advisors on the ground in Ukraine. But then we are really looking at a pathway to Polish direct military involvement in the war. And troops on the ground, I don't think that the Polish population, which is growing increasingly skeptical of the war, has any appetite for that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. How do you think this is playing inside of Poland? What sort of tea leaves can you read there?
Well, it's weird. I mean, obviously the Polish, there's no love lost between the Poles and the Russians.
Yes, right.
And there's a lot of violent history between the states.
Yes.
And so that's been one of the reasons why the Poles have been the Polish government has been so supportive of the Ukrainians. But there's also kind of two schools of thought, and actually, it's this kind of relates to what you were saying, Stu, on the party of strength. That the forces on the right in Poland have increasingly become the forces of, we hate Russia, but let's not provoke them. You see that in Hungary, you see that in Romania, right. You see that in a number of different Eastern European countries where the parties of the right have, they cannot get away with not condemning some of Russia's activities, but their view is, well, let's just try to make up, and everything will be okay. It's not going to be okay. It's a foolish and ill-fated approach, but that is one of the things that characterize the right.
That is more on the right than anywhere else, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I've observed that a lot more on the right.
And why is that? Is it a sort of Poland first isolationism? Is there some ideological empathy for when they? I think in America, the right looks at Russia and they see a country run by white men. There's no women. As Putin says, there's no gays in Russia. The whole thing is that they're all deep Christians and they don't really understand, but the church being a function of the old KGB.
I mean, that's been one of the strangest myths about Russia that endures, is that it's a deeply religious country. I mean, the last time I looked, the percentage of churchgoers in in Russia was well below a fifth of the population, and it has a very high of births out of wedlock. It is not a country that you would, other than some kind of government and religious institutions that cooperate together, it's not a country that you would say was a pious country or particularly devoted to religion. The idea that the Russian Orthodox Church, it playing a big symbolic role in government functions and holidays, that doesn't really justify this myth that Russia is a religious country. It just I think it defies the facts to make that assumption.
Sort of like Donald Trump as a Christian, a guy who entire life has viewed church as a place you go every 10 years or so to marry a model. That was sort of it. So I just got to ask, what is it like living in Kyiv now? I mean, how much is your life hour to hour, day to day affected by security concerns, I mean, how many people live in Kyiv right now? I know a lot left, but how many? What's
I don't know the exact number, but there are millions of people within the Kyiv metropolitan area.
So there's millions of people. Is there? I'm from what I understand, there's a sense of people kind of going about their lives, as there usually is in these kind of situations. But how much of it is it permeating the entire?
There's a daytime Ukraine and a nighttime Ukraine, right? So attacks almost always follow this cadence, where the daytimes are relatively safe, and then at night the air alarms sound, and you start hearing drones in the sky, and you start hearing the explosions of outgoing air defense and anti-aircraft fire. You start hearing incoming explosions of drones, these kamikaze drones called the Shaheds that are hitting targets. And it's one of those things where you're either in your hallway or you're in a basement or you're lying in your bed, and you start to figure out all the different sounds that are happening in the dark and what they are, and identifying them with this terrible familiarity. We have a story on counteroffensive.news where we recorded all of these different sounds and tried to play it for our readers so that they could have a better understanding of what it's like to hear them. And then we combined those sounds, or we compared those sounds with ordinary sounds you hear during the day, like motorcycles revving or a trash collection truck driving down the street. And what you realize is that these nighttime sounds, they start to bleed into your daytime experience, and that your body, even instinctually, tenses up when you hear a car go by or a construction site, someone drop something, because you are just on edge and on alert, worried about the risk to your life. And so that experience, that's a personal experience, but that's
where is this posted? This stuff. Where can we find this that you posted?
So you can see that post about the different sounds and play those sounds for yourself at counteroffensive.news.
Okay, good.
One of the things we hear most frequently, and which I'll probably hear tonight, is the sound of this kamikaze drone called the Shahed or Shahed. It is a drone that was originally manufactured by the Iranian government, and which now Russian co-production and production has taken over. And so they've gotten the nickname here in Ukraine, moped, because when you listen to them, you hear a buzzing in the sky, and it sounds like someone just revving a moped up a hill. And yeah, I mean, these are the sounds that you get used to, and they affect every part of your life. And what I mean by this is, and I've just conveyed to you my personal experience of it, but it replicates itself through millions of others who are living in fear every day because of the war that's ongoing, to say nothing of what it's like to live in a frontline area near where fighting is actively occurring.
And so you have this moment, sirens go off, you have to make a personal decision whether or not to stay in bed or in your apartment or to go to a shelter, right?
That's right. And actually the information on the kinds of attacks. So there are air alarms and then there are air alarms, right? There are air alarms. Air alarms are triggered, for example, by different kinds of attack aircraft taking off in Belarus or Russia, because they can launch missiles that that are super devastating and don't give a lot of time for preparation. And then there are air alarms that are initiated because of drone attacks, missile launches, all sorts of things. So drone attacks are pretty common. Like I said just a few days ago, 800. And so you got to think to yourself, okay, am I getting up out of bed, or am I going to take the risk and try to get a good night's sleep? But then when you see that there's a hypersonic missile that's been launched, then you're thinking, okay, very serious barrage. I better get out of bed. And that's one of the evaluations you got to make on a regular basis.
And you have apps that are tracking this, is that correct?
Yeah, you've got a lot of open source intelligence. So people have become kind of amateur trackers. They've got tips coming in from spotters near airfields and people reading radar. And it's really interesting how society has collaborated to make this information available. The technology has developed quite interestingly. I mean, I write a whole publication on Ukrainian military technology and how it's grown over the last couple of years, and that's been really fascinating to see as well.
So this makes you getting an iPhone back all the more important, right? Because otherwise you're going to be, yeah, I miss that hypersonic because like I just had this old Android. Yeah.
Well, if I miss the hypersonic, not to be too darkly comedic about it, but if I miss the hypersonic, I won't be around to worry about
you won't be around
about my mistake for very long.
There's always a positive side. Your Apple Care contract will be not particularly important. So just paint a picture for me. What sort of building do you live in? Do you live in an apartment building?
Yeah, I live in an apartment building in central Kyiv.
And
so we made all sorts of preparations in case the building gets hit, medical kits, fire blankets, all sorts of gear to make sure that we're as safe as can be. I mean, there's only so much you can do to prepare, but I'm on a relatively high floor, and so trying to find.
Is that good or bad?
It's not good. It's not good. I mean, the higher the floor, the more vulnerable you are to a strike. But I live in a relatively safe area.
And is there one central shelter for your building?
Yeah, there's a car park underground underneath the building.
And this is there's no mandatory evacuation, right?
No, and they couldn't enforce it anyways, right? So people make their own decisions about what they want to do, depending on their own risk. And a lot of people choose to go into their hallways. One of the rules of thumb is to have at least 2 walls between you and the outside. So some people, particularly those with young children who don't want to wake up their children in the middle of the night, end up putting them to bed in the hallway, so that there are a couple walls on each side. The managing editor for counteroffensive.news, she just gave birth recently. She wrote a story about what it's like to have a newborn and basically live in a hallway overnight. That's part of the kind of on the ground personal experience of what it's like to live through this war right now.
And the shelter is a parking garage?
Just a parking garage. One thing we tried to do at the counteroffensive is for all of our staff, we bought cots and sleeping bags and earplugs and eye masks for everyone on our team, because they were sleeping in subway stations and they were sleeping in, parking garages and things like that. And as miserable as it was, we wanted to make sure at least they had something to lie down on. Because if an air alarm sounds tonight, you go to a metro station, a subway station, you will find a lot of people down there sleeping.
And how are these? You go into these stations. How are they sort of self-dividing by families, by people that know each other, or they're kind of neighborhoods?
It's everyone for themselves. People just pick out a space and then try to do what they can to get a night's rest. We did a story about the nighttime attacks. Sleep deprivation is one step short of torture.
Yeah.
And people are suffering terribly. We did a story with a sleep clinic to try to understand the various disorders that are happening. We've done a story about the increase in diabetes that's been triggered by stress as a result. Childhood diabetes has been triggered by stress as a result of the war. Those are all elements of our coverage to try to show what's happening on the ground. One thing we wanted to do with the counteroffensive was really understand the war as more than just booms and bangs, right? Of course, there's violence occurring. We wanted to pull back the curtain on what it's like to actually be here and inspire a sense of connection between our readers who are often very, very far from Ukraine and what's actually happening on the ground. Our motto at the counteroffensive is empathy and autocracy can't mix. That when you share these personal stories, it inspires action and kind of pushes us to do something about it.
Right.
That you can't read about people or think about people who are just like us. And in this case, so many Ukrainians remind Americans of them. And so that's the basis on which we do all of our journalism.
Well, listen, we got to come back because I could talk to you all day about Into the Dangerous Night. I just find this fascinating, and it's so extraordinary what you're doing. But if we could get, like, Sam, if you could put back up info on, so counteroffensive.news, and there's a separate Substack that is called the Counteroffensive, correct? These are two.
The counteroffensive is counteroffensive.news.
Okay.
So let's just keep it simple. If people want to check out the journalism that I've been talking about, counteroffensive.news is where you can get it.
And how does that work? Is that a subscription? Do you have access to some, and then you have others that are subscriber only? Is that?
Yeah. Right now we're going through a fully paywalled September, but in October and future months, we'll have quite an amount of our journalism available for free. Yeah,
but clearly everybody should subscribe and support it. Well, listen, Tim, thank you. What time is it there?
Almost 10 p.m.
Okay. All right. Well, think about getting some sleep. I don't know how it'll go down.
I got to get some dinner.
Oh, you get some dinner. We won't keep you anymore. And think about getting that phone with those apps. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Please do follow Tim, counteroffensivenews.org. And don't forget that there's a European war on as we speak. It's very easy to forget in America.
Really looking forward to talking again, Stu. Let's chat soon.
Okay, talk soon. Bye.
Bye.